Richard Holdner, and welcome to the channel. Where are my small block Chevy fans? What is the most powerful factory 5.7 liter Chevy motor ever made? And before you comment, actually you can go ahead and comment, not including the 4-cam LT5 ZR1 350. In this video, we're going to take a look at a comparison between 4 different 5.7 liter performance GM motors. First off, we're going to compare the L46, the 350 horse 350. We're going to compare that to the LT1, which is the 360 horse 350. Then we're going to compare the Gen 2 LT1, only rated at 300 horsepower, but it actually makes a lot more. We're going to compare that to the 345 horsepower 5.7 liter LS1. And yes, I know I've forgotten the most important version. That is the 405 horsepower 5.7 liter LS6. And actually, I'm saving that for another comparison later on. We actually have an LT5, a 5.7 liter ZR1 motor, and I would very much like to compare that to the 405 horsepower LS6. Check it out. Now let's take a look at the first of 4 different versions of our 5.7 liter, in this case otherwise known as the original 350 cubic inch small block Chevy. This was one of the hottest versions offered by GM of the Performance 350. This was the hottest hydraulic flat tappet camshaft 350 that they offered. It was the 350 horse 350, meaning it was rated at 350 horsepower by GM. But as we'll see, there's a difference in this early gross power rating versus the net power rating. But this was an L46. This is the designation that they gave to this Performance 350. And like a lot of their stuff, we'll go ahead and take a look at the specs on this. They started out with a short block, a 350-inch short block that was a 4-inch bore and a 348 stroke. Now, with a lot of their performance small blocks, they offered high compression. So this was 11-to-1, which was kind of their choice, their go-to choice for a lot of the performance small blocks like the LT1, the L46 365 horse 327, and the fuel-injected 375 horse version, also 11-to-1, came in the DZ302. So it was kind of their go-to static compression ratio. For this one, we ran 492 fuelie heads on it, 64cc chambers. This one, unlike a lot of the others, actually, the L46 was specific camshaft to this combination. It was very similar in specs to the 350 horse 327 cam, very popular cam for GM back in the day. But unlike the other performance applications, the other performance small block applications, this L46 was actually equipped with a quadrajet intake manifold and quadrajet carburetor. A lot of the other performance small blocks came with high-rise dual-plane intake manifolds, but they were designed to accept. They normally use the Holley 780 vacuum secondary carburetor on a lot of those performance small block Chevys. Other ones use smaller ones like the 350 horse 327. But that 780 was kind of their go-to performance deal. They also use that on a lot of big block applications. We ran this L46 350 horse 350 with 1 3/4 dyno headers. They had 18-inch collector extensions. This thing seemed to run best with a total timing of 33 to 34 degrees in the distributor, and then run in this configuration on the engine dyno. We ran this on 91 octane. It was actually fine because we run these things a little bit cold. So it was fine running it. And this would be more representative of what GM did when they rated them. They would run them on the engine dyno in an optimized condition, much like this. So we can see that the rating was actually fairly accurate. On our test, this thing made 348 horsepower, so right near what they would have run and rated it back in the day. It made almost 400 foot-pounds, 398.6, so we'll call that 399 foot-pounds. Good power curve. But a lot of people might be thinking, yeah, Richard, that's good, but that's not the highest performance 350 that they offered back in the muscle car area, and you would be right. We also ran the 1970 LT1, which was rated at 360 horsepower, and we'll show you that, and we'll talk about the differences on the LT1. This was the LT1 that we ran. Now, the LT1 differed from this L46 In a couple of ways. It had 492 heads on it. It had we ran it with a Holley 750. It would have originally came with a Holley 780. The vacuum secondary carburetor would not really have flowed much more than this modern 750 that we had. So I don't think that there was too much power there. It had the aluminum high-rise dual plane intake manifold on it. It was 11-to-1. We ran it with the same dyno headers. And this combination actually wanted more timing. It was more like 36 or 37 degrees that we ran on this LT1 because it kept responding to timing. We also lashed this thing down to below 24 thousandths on the lash because the LT1 had an LT1 specific camshaft in it, and the LT1 was a solid flat tappet camshaft as opposed to the L46, which was a hydraulic flat tappet camshaft. So the solid lifter combinations like the DZ302, the L46, and this LT1, they all got the solid cams, and a lot of other performance small blocks got the hydraulic cams. But this combination made a little bit more power, and it was rated at a little bit more power than the 350 horse 350. It was up to 353 or 354 horsepower. Peak torque was actually down. It was 391 or 2, 391.4. And you could see it made a little bit less power down low than the hydraulic flat tappet camshaft version did, and a little bit more power on the top, kind of exactly what you expect. So now let's take a look at two more performance versions of the 5.7 liter, including the Gen 2 LT1 and then the LS1. The next 5.7 liter comparison compares the more modern versions of these upgraded 5.7 liters. The first is still a 350 cubic inch motor, but is the Gen 2 LT1. The first one came in 1970. This one was in the middle 1990s, and it was the reverse water flow, aluminum headed, they switched over from the tune port intake manifold to the short runner LT1 style intake manifold, and this thing actually made very good power. In fact, this combination actually made more power than the high compression version did back in 1970. So this LT1, we'll take a look here. It was the stock short runner LT1. This one also had the stock throttle body on it. The only thing we didn't run was the air intake and that sort of assembly. We ran 1 5/8 headers with 18-inch collector extensions. It had the stock cams, stock heads, the way that it came. We ran it with a fast management system. And this one was driving the factory water pump where we had run an electric water pump on the original 1970 LT1 version. And then obviously we optimized the tune with a fast XFI management system. Run in this configuration, and again we ran this on 91, which this motor would easily do. This thing produced 362 horsepower and 391 foot-pounds of torque. Very similar in peak numbers, a little bit more peak power out at the top. Very similar in torque production compared to the carbureted 1970 LT1. But let's see how this 5.7 liter compares to the next generation of 5.7 liter small blocks when GM switched over from the conventional small block over to the LS1. So this was a 5.7 liter LS1. You can see it made quite a bit more power. And let's see here, our LS1 was configured like the LT1. It was all stock. This was a GM Performance crate motor. This is a 5.7 liter, so it's stock block, stock head, stock cam, stock throttle body. It was a manual throttle body. This had the early, didn't have the early LT1 intake manifold on it. It had the later LS6 intake manifold on it, which GM introduced. They basically ended up replacing all of the factory LT1 intakes. After they introduced the LS6, they made that a running change and started putting that intake manifold on all of the LT1. So this one had that. We ran hooker long tube headers on this like we had with the other versions, and we had 36-pound injectors in it, mostly not because we needed it for this particular combination for the stock one, but because we were going to be doing cam tests and all kinds of things with this LS1. So basically this LS1 was run in the same configuration as the other motors that we tested, and it was rated at, depending on which Gen 2 LT1 you had, anywhere from 300 or 285 horsepower, depending on which application it was in, to 300 horsepower or so in the Corvettes. The LS1 obviously was rated at 345 horsepower, so it was rated at more power. We would expect it to make more power than the LT1. That's exactly what it did. Run in the configuration that we run it or on the engine dyno, this thing made 414 horsepower and 418 foot-pounds of torque, which is similar to the power ratings, at least that they were very similar in the factory power ratings. But you can see the LS1 basically made more power everywhere than the LT1. Down at the very bottom in the 3,000 to 3,500 range, the torque output was very similar. The LT1 has a little bit more displacement than the LS1. The LS1 has a lot of things going for it. It has a factory windage tray. It has much better flowing cylinder heads. It has a much better long runner, and especially in the LS6 intake manifold, has a good sized throttle body. All of that stuff combined to have the factory LS1 produce more power than the factory 350 cubic inch LT1. Let's get to our conclusion. I really like looking back at these performance small blocks from the muscle car era. I like this retrospective look, and I like comparing them on the dyno so we can see what they actually do when we compare them back to back. So this was a good example. We took a look at the 350 horse 350, the L46, and then compared that to the 360 horsepower 350, the LT1. It's kind of cool to compare them in the same condition on the same dyno and see what they actually do. So we can see, hey, yes, the LT1 was rated at 360 horsepower. Didn't quite make that, but it does make more power than the 350 horse 350 at the top, although it makes less power down low. So it's very cool. You get to decide which one of those combinations would I actually like to have in my car. The other thing is we take a look at the evolution of the small block. So we go from those original muscle car era versions to like the Gen 2 LT1. Even though it was rated at 300 horsepower, because that's the gross versus net power rating difference, but we saw that it actually makes more power than the 360 horse version back in 1970. We also see as we transitioned from the conventional small block over to the LS1 engine family, we saw a big change in power. The LS1 was rated at more power and actually made more power than the original small block stuff, even that good Gen 2 LT1. Now, I know everybody wants to see the comparison that I was talking about earlier. We want to see somebody run that ZR1 LT5 4-cam version motor, and luckily for me, Westech actually has one at their shop. When we're trying to get it running, it will be great to see that thing and hear it actually run on the dyno. I would very much love to compare it to what is probably the ultimate 5.7 liter that I didn't include in this test. That's the 405 horsepower LS6 performance version of the LS1, but that's going to be another test for another day. I'm Richard Hurler. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing as always coming up.